One of the good parts about being a scientist is that what we know is changing daily. You know, as more science is done and more things are published, and so it's really fascinating to see how we have kind of reconstructed what happened with sea level in recent past and what are the causes of the changes that we're now seeing. So I could give a whole lecture on this, but to be concise. It's now, the evidence is pretty clear that in the early part of the 19th century, so the 1800s, sea level was fairly level on a global basis all around, and it had been for quite a long time, almost 2,000 years, a little bit of variation with time. Now in this area, you know, as our forefathers came in here and colonized, they colonized islands in the bay and the like that are now no longer here. So why did they disappear? Was it sea level was rising then? Well, it was, but relative to the land. And so in the 19th century, most of the sea level rise that was apparent that caused the inundation of the islands was due to subsidence. And we had very little acceleration of or rate of change of the ocean levels. Fast forwarding to the 20th century, from the early 20th century, not only here but around the world, we saw this acceleration of sea level rise. And now, the evidence is overwhelming that that's due to the warming of the planet. The warming has caused a number of changes which has affected the level of the oceans. One, the most straightforward one, is that as the oceans warm, not only is the air warming, you know, air temperature warming, but ocean temperature is warming. So as you warm the oceans, the volume expands. So the warmer for a liquid or a gas, the greater the temperature, the greater the volume. And so that expansion of the volume of the ocean affects the level of the ocean. Number two, we have had a very rapid, by historical standards, melting of glaciers all around the world. Now, there are some glaciers which are still growing, but most around the world are retreating rather rapidly. So we've got oceans rising because they're getting warmer and more water wrapped up in ice in glaciers that was sitting on land that's now draining to the ocean. The third major contribution, which is one that is the wild card, the one that we're all concerned about, is the melting of the ice sheets that sit on Greenland and on Antarctica. You might also be aware that we've had a rapid loss of sea ice in the Arctic Ocean. That actually contributes nothing really to sea level rise because it's already floating on the water. So it's just if you had ice cubes in a glass that could melt and don't cause the glass to overflow, that doesn't contribute. It's the ice that's sitting on land masses that are now draining into the ocean. That really was a fairly neutral amount, no real impact until in the 1980s, more or less. We start to see now a very clear signal of a loss of ice, polar ice that's sitting on land masses. And it's yet contributed only a very small amount to sea level, but the concern is that that will be a big new factor. And that's where it's very hard to tell you precisely by 2050 or 2060 exactly what the sea level is going to be, because we could calculate it pretty well just by the warming, but we don't know how rapidly this ice mass will melt. Historically, if we have these big changes, it can rise the water levels, 20, 30, 40 feet. But generally that takes many, many centuries to happen. So now we're seeing a warming which is unprecedented in terms of its rapidity. And we don't know how slowly the ice will melt or how quickly it will melt. So that's why when we have these alternatives of various scenarios, we put a range around them because of that unknown. That's one thing that affects it. The other thing that will affect is how fast we heat up the planet, and that's up to us rather than the globe. So How much we emit, continue to emit greenhouse gases, how quickly we warm the planet will make our challenge more or less easy. And then secondly, how fast these polar ice sheets will melt as we warm the planet is going to be the other determinant in terms of what levels we'll have to deal with.